I still remember the exact moment when I realized my family had never truly seen me. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before my mother's birthday, when I called home to let them know I'd be arriving early to help with preparations, the same way I had for the past decade. "Dad, hey, it's Ryan. Just wanted to let you know I'll be home 2 days early for Mom's birthday. Thought I could help set things up, like usual." There was a pause on the other end, not the comfortable silence of a father processing his son's words, but the heavy, awkward kind that signals something is wrong. "Ryan," he finally said, his voice strangely distant, "if possible, maybe don't come home this year." I laughed, assuming he was concerned about my work schedule. "It's fine, Dad, I've already arranged everything at work. Booked the flights to..." Another pause, longer this time. "Jessica's bringing her boyfriend home this year," he continued, his voice firmer now. "He's a manager, someone important, speaks well, carries himself properly. And your job? Well, it isn't very comfortable to talk about, so it's best if you don't come." The coffee mug I'd been holding suddenly felt scalding against my palm. I gripped it tighter, feeling heat rise from my neck to my face. "What the hell did you just say?" My voice was unrecognizable even to myself. "You coming home would just embarrass the whole family," he replied coolly. "If you insist on coming, don't call me your father." The line went dead. I stood frozen in my kitchen, phone still pressed against my ear, listening to nothing. His words echoed in my head like a broken record. "You coming home would just embarrass the whole family. Don't call me your father." I slowly placed my phone on the counter, my hands trembling slightly. The apartment was eerily quiet, no TV, no footsteps, just me standing there as if I'd been plucked out of my own life. That's when memories started flooding back. For over 2 years, I had been silently paying all of their bills: electricity, water, internet every month without fail. Nearly $400 monthly, automatically deducted from my account. No one ever mentioned it. And now they were calling me the family's shame. I opened my banking app, scrolling through the transaction history. I needed to see the exact amount I'd spent on my family over the past 2 years. Every payment was there, made on schedule, without fail. Total amount, $9,842.17. I stared at that number for a long time. Not because I was shocked, but because something inside my chest had settled. Not grief, not even anger, just emptiness. Nearly $10,000. And now, I was the family's shame. As I looked at the long list of transactions, a question arose that no one in my family had asked in 30 years. Has Jessica ever done as much for our parents as I have? It wasn't jealousy, and I wasn't looking for credit. It was simply that if I was deemed the family's shame, who was the standard being measured against? I'd paid almost $10,000 in living expenses for them secretly, without asking for anything in return, and without ever mentioning it. What about her? Had she ever sacrificed or struggled? Or did she just show up, smile prettily, and make an impression in a nice dress while holding a successful boyfriend's arm? I wasn't keeping score. I was just realizing, for the first time, that fairness had never existed in our household. I'd grown accustomed to standing on the sidelines since childhood. In family photos, I was often partially hidden behind someone else or captured at the edge of the frame, never quite looking at the camera. Nobody explicitly told me to step aside, but I always did. Jessica was at the center of every significant family event: birthdays, graduations, even her breakups. There was always a reason for everyone to rally around, console, and celebrate her. I can't remember the last time anyone asked if I was okay. Jessica is 2 years older than me, but the difference between us was never about age. She was the hope, the future-oriented child that our parents proudly mentioned when relatives visited. And me, in those same conversations, if I was mentioned at all, it was as a brief footnote. "Ryan, oh, he's fine. I think he works in technology or something." I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, stayed out of trouble, and quietly handled everything, they'd eventually see me. They never did. When you're used to being invisible, nobody notices when you leave. I began covering my parents' utility bills: electricity, water, and internet about 2 years ago. My mother called one day, and everything started there. "The cost of living has gone up so much," she lamented. "This month's bills are unexpectedly high, and our retirement income just isn't enough anymore." Then, gently and hesitantly, "If you could help us even a little, it would mean so much." I agreed without hesitation. At the time, I thought it would be just a few months until things settled down. But the pattern continued, month after month. Nobody mentioned ending it, and there was no backup plan. Occasionally, I'd ask, "Is Jessica helping out at all?" "Mom?" She'd always evade the question. Sometimes she'd say, "Just help us this month. Your sister will pitch in next time." Other times, "Your sister's covering Dad's medical expenses." That's not easy either. I heard those lines so many times I could recite them by heart, and I just smiled and let it go every time because I knew none of it was true. So I kept sending the money, nearly $400 per month, reliably and quietly, without complaint. Nobody ever mentioned it, not because I didn't care, but because I felt it was the right thing to do. I used to think that if I was quiet and responsible enough, they would notice me. But now, They looked at me and called me the family shame. After sitting in silence for what felt like hours, I made a decision. I opened my banking app again, navigated to the automatic payments section where I had set up monthly transfers to cover my parents' expenses, and canceled them one by one. Not out of revenge, but to preserve the one thing I still had. A semblance of self-respect, the only thing they hadn't taken from me. About a week later, I received a message from my mother, in the same soothing tone she always used. No mention of what had happened, no apology. I just got a notice that the internet bill is due. Can you take care of it? I read the message, stared at the screen for a while, then put the phone down without responding. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because after everything, the first thing they thought to say was a request. Pay the internet bill. There was no, "Are you okay?" or even a simple, "Can we talk?" So I remained silent. And that silence said everything. 2 weeks later, my father called. The phone rang a few times before stopping. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, he left a voicemail, his tone sharp and impatient as usual. "The power company called. This month's bill hasn't been paid." What's going on? No concern, no mention of what he had said the day I called about coming home for Mom's birthday. I listened to the message, then turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. And just like that, I remained silent until my mother's birthday. My mother's birthday was about 3 weeks after my father told me not to come home. The party went on as planned. Her favorite roasted chicken, cake from her favorite bakery, and close relatives gathering around the dinner table. Everything meticulously planned and executed, except for my absence. That afternoon, at exactly 4 p.m., I was sitting in my living room with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold when my phone chimed. It was my mother calling. I looked at her name on the screen for a few seconds before putting the phone down. I didn't answer, didn't even think twice. My dad called a few minutes later, followed by Jessica. 3 calls in less than 10 minutes. I let them all go to voicemail. No curiosity, no urge to respond. I just stayed where I was, leaning lightly against the back of my chair, my gaze fixed on the fogged-up window. The sky outside was a dull gray. No rain, but cold in that silent, creeping way that suggests winter has just brushed against your doorstep. The messages began arriving about 10 minutes later. Mom was first. "Ryan, the power has been turned off. The entire house is dark. Please pay the bill." I picked up the phone and read her message in silence. There was no anger or surprise, just a calm hollowness spreading through my chest. The kind you get when you've spent years caring for a family and you the only one left bearing the burden. Then my father, "No water, we can't cook, handle it now." Followed by Jessica, "Internet's down. Guests are arriving. Please fix this urgently." I looked at the clock, 5:12 p.m. I remembered clearly I had canceled all automatic payments exactly 3 weeks ago, immediately after my father told me that if I insisted on coming home, I should never call him Dad again. And now, in the middle of the birthday party, I had been instructed not to attend. Everything began to shut down. Power, water, internet. Each utility vanished just when they needed it most. I didn't text back or call. I didn't feel the need to explain. I just sat there, carefully rotating the cold coffee cup in my hands, my eyes still fixed on the window as if seeing past all I could see. And in that moment, I realized they weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because there was no one left to shoulder their burden. Around 6 p.m., my phone began buzzing again, this time, non-stop. But it wasn't my parents or Jessica anymore. It was relatives who only visit on holidays, yet feel entitled to pass judgment. The messages arrived in waves. Some called me disrespectful. One stated bluntly, "You embarrassed your mother in front of the whole family." Another, more subtle, but just as cutting, "Your sister was right. People like you shouldn't show up on a happy day." I read through each message without responding, not because silence implied agreement, but because I've grown tired of explaining myself to people who always chose the louder crowd over what was right. I was about to put down the phone when the screen lit up again. It was Aunt Lauren, the only family member who still believed in me. She was calling on video through an old app that only she and I still used, because we were the only ones who cared enough to look each other in the eyes when it mattered. I hesitated before answering on the second ring. The first thing I saw was her face, partially obscured by the yellow light from the kitchen behind Hera Place. I knew like the back of my hand, every crack in the wall and every squeaky cabinet. But tonight, the room felt different. There were clinks of silverware, nervous laughs, and scattered conversations in the background. She looked at me through the screen, her eyes warm but troubled. "You're not going to pay for it, are you, Ryan?" Her tone was light, as if she were trying to figure out what was happening. I looked into her eyes, and when I finally spoke, my voice was slow, as if I was dragging up something buried too long. "You know, Auntie, Dad told me not to come." I swallowed hard. He said if I still insisted on showing up, I shouldn't call him my father anymore. She went quiet. Her eyes shifted, as if she was surveying the room behind her. Right then, the call erupted into chaos. I could hear my mother's voice cutting through the noise. "Tell him I am ashamed of him. On this day, of all days, how could he do this?" My father spoke sharply. It's not that serious. It's just paying a few bills. What kind of man gets petty over money? Another voice adding Kate was my uncle. Poor Jessica having to deal with a brother like that. Footsteps approached the camera. Jessica appeared behind Aunt Lauren, arms crossed and lips twisted with annoyance. He even picked up the call. Mom's been crying all day. Does he even care? Seriously. No shame at all. I didn't say anything. I just watched and remained silent, as if it were my only defense. I was about to end the call when another face appeared on the left side of the screen, a young man with perfectly combed hair and a dark suit. He looked at me with confusion in his eyes, then smiled hesitantly. "Hey boss," he said, his voice somewhat scratchy, as if he wasn't sure the words belonged in this situation. I froze, my gaze fixed on the screen, and I unconsciously gripped the phone tighter. I hadn't expected this. Not here, not on the night when everyone felt I was too much of an embarrassment to be invited. I stared at him for a few seconds longer, and then it all clicked. His expression, the way he spoke, of course he was one of the new employees who had recently transferred from our southern branch. We'd exchanged a few emails, and he'd sent me to reports, but I had no idea he was Jessica's boyfriend, the one everyone was trying to impress. The room behind Aunt Lauren seemed to hold its breath. I saw her glance over her shoulder, and the kitchen erupted in frantic commotion. Then someone said quietly, "Wait, what did he just call Ryan?" Another voice followed, confused. "Boss, does that mean Ryan is Jessica's boyfriend's boss?" The whispers grew like a rising wave, overlapping and uneasy. And me? I just kept looking at the screen. No nod, no denial, simply waiting to see where this would go. And right then, something unexpected happened. The young man stood up straighter, looked past the camera to the others in the room, and spoke plainly. "In case you didn't know, I work at Pacific Terratech. Mr. Ryan isn't just my boss, he founded the company." His words were crisp and clear, loud enough to cut through the clatter of dishes and murmuring, and the room fell into an unusual silence, not awkward, simply stunned. I still didn't say anything. I pressed my lips together and gave a soft nod of confirmation. He returned his gaze to the camera, eyes wide, and I said calmly, evenly, as if the words had been waiting for this moment, "Hope your big introduction goes well." Then I hung up. That night, I slept soundly. No tossing and turning, no jolting awake in the dark with old questions replaying through my mind. For the first time in years, I felt light, not from satisfaction, but because they finally saw me for who I was. The next morning, before sunlight had fully filtered through my thin curtains, I reached for my phone and checked my emails as usual. A few meeting reminders, a couple of accounting comments, and then I noticed a name I recognized in the sender field. Hudson Kane. I opened the email. The first line struck me immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were Jessica's brother. I've always respected you at the company." I raised an eyebrow, leaned back into my pillow, and continued reading. Hudson wrote that he had been genuinely shocked to discover the family connection between Jessica and me. And then, without sidestepping or softening it, he stated, "I didn't expect her to be like that. I'll be ending this relationship. Thank you for not putting me on the spot in front of everyone." I laid the phone on my chest and closed my eyes briefly. After a few minutes, I reopened my inbox and began typing my response, slowly, clearly, and without embellishment. "That's your matter. I don't expect anyone to make decisions to stay in my good graces. Think carefully before you do anything. And for the record, I don't bring family into the workplace." I pressed send. No further thought, no lingering emotion. For me, that was sufficient. Some things, once clarified, require nothing else. Around 10 a.m., while I was wrapping up a meeting with department heads and taking notes, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the name. Jessica, my sister. I stared at it for a few seconds before hitting decline. Not out of anger, not to make a point, but simply because I'd had enough of apologies that only appeared after everything had already fallen apart. Within 5 minutes, a message arrived. "I'm sorry, I didn't think Hudson would change like that. You're his boss. If he said something, I'm sure he'd listen. Please talk to him. Ask him to come back to me." After reading it, I walked to the hallway window and leaned against it. I reviewed the message several times before typing my response, neither too long nor too short for her to understand. Hudson didn't leave because I told him to. He left because of how you live, how you treat people, how you look down on what you don't understand, and how you always assume that with a soft enough voice, you can steer anyone. I pressed send, put the phone back in my pocket, and returned to my desk. Less than a minute later, another message arrived. "I know I messed up. This time I mean it. I'll change. Please believe me. Just this once." I didn't respond. I read it, sat with it for a bit, and nothing moved inside me. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. Sometimes the distance between two people isn't in the apology. It's in when the apology arrives. I gently deleted the message, leaving nothing behind, and returned to my current life. A week later, on a Friday afternoon, as I walked back into my home from the garage, I froze on the porch. My parents stood at the front door, each holding a small suitcase, their faces drawn with exhaustion from the long journey. I didn't ask why they were here, if they'd traveled all this way to see me. This wasn't a casual visit. I opened the door and welcomed them in no tension, no forced politeness, just a simple choice. I didn't want to have that conversation outside where the wind was picking up. We sat in the living room with steaming cups of tea on the table. My father spoke first, apologizing in a quieter tone than normal. My mother added to it, saying they'd thought things through. Perhaps they'd gone too far, and things should never have reached this point. I remained silent and didn't interrupt, just listening to see if this apology marked the end of something or the beginning of something else. And as I expected, my father's tone changed. We're family, Ryan, and family helps each other. We raised you, sent you to school. Everything you have now, a part of it comes from us, right? I looked at him. My expression remained unchanged, but my posture straightened slightly. Then my mother spoke, her voice quiet, as if she were saying something quite reasonable. If you could maybe send us about $2,000 a month, just a little support, it's not much for someone like you. I stared at the two people sitting in my living room, the same people who had kicked me out of a family event because they thought I was an embarrassment. And now they were sitting in my house, placing a monetary value on their apology. $2,000 each month because I was their son. To them, my success was a debt that I owed them. After their request, I let out a quiet chuckle, not loud or snarky, but the kind you make when someone tells you a story that doesn't add up. I looked at my parents, their eyes fixed on mine, as if they expected me to nod in agreement. But I wasn't angry. I'd come too far to be bothered by things like this. I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm and clear. What about Jessica? How much will she be contributing each month? The room seemed to pause at that point. The air tightened. My father glanced at my mother. She responded slowly, her voice dropping slightly. Your sister's job? It's still unstable. And the breakup with Hudson has taken a toll on her. I nodded softly, not surprised. The same old excuses dressed in empathetic language, but they were merely I raised my gaze, looked squarely at them, and said, if she agrees to support you with $2,000 per month, I'll do the same. No more, no less. They didn't say anything, just stared at me, trying to determine if I was serious. I continued quietly, or if you want me to carry the full amount, I'll need something in writing, a legal agreement confirming that, after you both pass, the house will belong to me in full. I sat still after that. No pressure, no further explanation, just waiting to see how they'd react, now that for the first time I was establishing terms for something they'd always felt was my responsibility. As soon as I finished speaking, the room fell into a deep, dense silence. My father suddenly rose to his feet. He slammed his palm down on the hardwood table, tipping over his teacup and spilling its contents down the side. His shout echoed around the room, his chest rising and falling in fury. You're setting conditions for your parents? We raised you for over 20 years, and now you want to nickel and dime us like this? What kind of son are you? He was shouting so loudly that I wouldn't have been surprised if the neighbors heard everything. I didn't move or flinch. I just sat there, hands resting on the chair's armrests, gaze fixed on him, not cold, but no longer gentle. I waited for him to finish before standing up carefully. My voice came out low and calm, yet clear enough to cut through the chaos he had just created. I think you both should leave my house. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't spoken in anger. It was merely a request from someone who had reached the limits of what respect could provide. No one said anything else, only the sound of luggage dragging across the hardwood floor and the door clicking shut behind them, quieter than all they had just left inside me. It's been 2 years since I last saw them in my home. I didn't block their numbers, change my email address, or cut them off completely. I simply stopped reaching out and waited. I waited to see if they would still consider me family, after I was no longer in the shadow of duty and obligation. In those 2 years, there hasn't been a single call or message asking how I've been, no mention of birthdays, health, or even a simple, how are you doing? I used to believe they would change one day, but I've realized that not everyone changes, especially those who have never acknowledged they were wrong in the first place. I still live here, work, and go about my daily existence. The only difference is that I no longer allow myself to be an emotional ATM, ready to give and be hurt in the name of obligation. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that family is not a place where people can demand kindness and call it love. A real family is one where you are valued as a person regardless of what you have to offer, not as a wallet, not as a backup plan, not as a last resort when everything else fails. The doorbell rang on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 2 years and 3 months after my parents left my house. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Aunt Lauren standing there, her face lined with more wrinkles than I remembered, but her eyes just as kind. May I come in? She asked softly. I stepped aside, welcoming her with a genuine smile. We sat in the kitchen, steam rising from our coffee cups, the silence comfortable between us. Your father had a stroke last week, she finally said, her voice steady but sad. Your mother didn't want me to tell you, but I thought you should know. I nodded slowly, feeling something stir inside me, not quite grief, but not indifference either. How bad is it? He's stable. The right side of his body is affected. He's in rehab now. She paused, studying my face. There's something else. I waited, hands wrapped around my mug. Jessica lost her job 6 months ago. She moved back in with them right before your father's stroke. Aunt Lauren took a careful sip of her coffee. The house, they're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank sent a final notice. I didn't speak for a long time. Outside, leaves were falling, golden and red against the blue sky. Finally, I looked at Aunt Lauren. Why are you telling me this? She met my gaze directly. Because despite everything, I know who you are, Ryan. I've always known, and I thought you should have the choice. After she left, I sat alone for hours, thinking about choices and consequences, about the invisible threads that bind us to our past even when we try to cut them. The next morning, I called my bank and set up a transfer not to my parents' account, but directly to their mortgage company, enough to cover the delinquent payments and 3 months ahead. I didn't include a note or call to tell them. Some actions speak for themselves. A week later, I received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note in my father's shaky, post-stroke handwriting. Asterisk, I was wrong. I'm sorry. 4 words. No request for money. No manipulation. No mention of Jessica. Just 4 words that had taken a lifetime and a stroke to write. I folded the note and placed it in my wallet. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a marker of change, however small, however late. The following weekend, I drove to my childhood home for the first time in nearly 3 years. As I parked in the driveway, I saw my father through the window, sitting in his wheelchair by the table, laboriously working through rehabilitation exercises. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her eyes wide with surprise and something like hope. Behind her stood Jessica, looking smaller somehow. The confident sheen that had always surrounded her now dimmed. Ryan, my mother said, her voice breaking slightly. We didn't expect you. I know, I replied simply. I stepped inside, carrying nothing but myself. No expectations, no resentment, no hidden agenda. Just a man visiting the place where he began. Not to reclaim an old role, but to see if a new one might be possible. My father looked up as I entered the living room, his eyes clearer than I remembered them. He struggled to raise his good hand in greeting. Son, he said, the word falling between us like a bridge half built. I nodded and sat down across from him. Dad, I replied. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't reconciliation, not fully, but it was something true. Something real. In the kitchen, I heard my mother and Jessica moving about, preparing tea perhaps, or simply giving us space. Outside, autumn was turning to winter, the world preparing to sleep before awakening anew. Inside, we were just beginning the slow, difficult work of seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. I don't know what will grow from this moment. I am now, if old patterns can truly be broken, or if new understanding can take root where hurt has lived for so long. But I'm here, and for now, that's enough of a beginning. The most profound twist in my story is about revelation, or Uninvited, about the possibility that even the deepest wounds might someday start to heal. Not because we forget them, but because we finally have the courage to face them together. I used to believe my family could fix anything. Then I believed they could fix nothing. Now I wonder if maybe, just maybe, we can learn to build something new from the broken pieces of what once was. Not perfect, not ideal, but real as the imperfect people we all are. And perhaps that's the most honest definition of family after all.